We don't always recognize the cage while we're inside it, because sometimes the bars aren't made of steel, they're made of manipulation, guilt, charm, and fear. Living with a narcissist often feels like dancing in a storm. One moment you're cherished, the next you're crushed. You try harder, give more, shrink smaller, hoping they'll love you like they once pretended to. But here's the truth, you were never the problem. You were simply their solution to emptiness, to ego, to a need to control. Escaping that world isn't just about walking away. It's about unlearning the lies, reclaiming your voice, building boundaries where none existed. It's about coming back to life after years of emotional silence. And yes, rebuilding is hard. You'll grieve, you'll doubt yourself. But slowly, piece by piece, you'll rediscover who you are, not the version they shaped, but the one you were always meant to be. Healing starts when we stop blaming ourselves and start choosing ourselves. You're not broken, you're waking up. And your future, the real one, starts the moment you decide to walk out of their story and write your own. We don't always recognize deception when it's wrapped in charm. That's the danger of the narcissist's world. It doesn't come crashing in like a storm, it creeps in like a warm breeze. At first, it feels comforting, flattering even. You're seen, you're admired, you're told you're special, irreplaceable, and for a moment it feels like you've found something real. But slowly, ever so subtly, the rules begin to change, the praise turns conditional. The warmth comes with a cost, and before you even realize what's happening, you've begun trading your self-worth for moments of approval. You start editing your words second, guessing your choices, apologizing for things you didn't do. You walk on eggshells, not because you want to keep the peace, but because you've been made to believe that their mood, their happiness, their stability somehow depends on you. It doesn't. But that's the illusion they build. They craft a world where they are the sun and you revolve around them, where their needs always take priority and your boundaries are seen as threats, where your feelings are either minimized, dismissed, or worse, used against you. They don't scream, at least not always. They don't have to. Manipulation doesn't need volume, it just needs repetition. Quiet, consistent erosion of your confidence. You're too sensitive. You misunderstood me. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Sound familiar? It's not love. It's control disguised as care. It's power masked as passion. And when you finally start questioning it, you're met with confusion. Because how can someone who once made you feel so special now make you feel so small? That's the trick. Narcissists don't dominate through force, they dominate through doubt. Doubt in your perception, doubt in your memory, doubt in your instincts. You begin to wonder if you're the one losing control, when in reality, you're the only one trying to hold on to it. They construct a reality where they are always right, even if it means rewriting your truth. They will twist facts, deny promises, and flip every situation to suit their narrative. You'll try to explain your feelings, but the conversation always loops back to them. Your hurt becomes their burden. Your concern becomes your fault. And round you go, until you stop speaking altogether because silence feels safer than being misunderstood again. That's how the world of a narcissist operates. Not with honesty, but with distortion. Not with respect, but with exploitation. And the hardest part, you don't see the bars until you try to leave. That's when the mask slips. That's when the charm disappears and the punishment begins. Guilt, gaslighting, threats, or worse yet silence, because for the narcissist, your independence isn't just inconvenient. It's intolerable, but here's what you need to understand: their world is a fiction. One that only works if you keep playing your role. The moment you stop, the illusion begins to crumble. You were never meant to shrink yourself to fit inside someone else's fragile ego. You weren't put here to serve someone else's version of truth. And you are not responsible for holding up a world that was never built to honor your worth. You don't escape a narcissist's world by running away. You escape it by waking up. By seeing through the charm, the tactics, the manipulation, and remembering that you are allowed to exist fully, freely, and unapologetically. You were not made to orbit around someone else. You were made to shine. One of the most damaging things about being in a narcissistic relationship is that it convinces you that you are the problem. Not just once, not just during an argument, but constantly, quietly, and relentlessly. Every disagreement somehow circles back to you. Every conflict becomes your fault. Every crack in the relationship is because you weren't patient enough, kind enough, understanding enough, and over time, that voice becomes internal. You begin to carry the blame like a weight, not because it's yours to hold, but because you've been taught that it is. But here's the hard truth we need to say out loud: you are not the problem, you never were. You were the mirror, the one who reflected back their insecurities, their shame, their unhealed wounds. And rather than face those things, they projected them onto you. Because it's easier for a narcissist to dismantle someone else's identity than to confront the emptiness of their own. They needed someone to criticize, to mold, to invalidate, not because you were broken, but because they couldn't handle your wholeness. Your kindness threatened them. Your strength intimidated them. Your ability to love purely without a hidden motive exposed how transactional their own behavior was. So what do? They chip away at you. They question your intentions. They mock your dreams. They make you feel like you're too emotional, too needy, too much. And then in the same breath, they'll tell you that no one else could ever love you the way they do, that without them you'd be lost. This is not love. It's dependency masquerading as devotion, and when we're in it, it's almost impossible to see clearly because our minds get foggy. We second guess ourselves. We wonder if maybe we really are too sensitive or too dramatic or too hard to deal with. We forget who we were before the confusion set in. That's what makes it so difficult to walk away. Not just the fear of being alone, but the fear that maybe, just maybe, they were right about you. That all your flaws are real and unlovable. But that's not truth, that's trauma. What they said about you wasn't a reflection of your worth, it was a reflection of their need for control. Their words were weapons, designed not to speak truth, but to break down your sense of self until you became easier to manage. But you can't shrink your way into someone's love. You can't keep editing yourself in hopes that one day it'll finally be enough. It won't, because what they want isn't a partner, it's someone to blame. Someone to carry the emotional weight they refuse to hold themselves. And the most courageous thing you can do is to stop carrying it, to step back and say, this is not mine. The anxiety, the guilt, the doubt, they were never yours to begin with. They were handed to you by someone who didn't know how to take responsibility for their own pain. You didn't cause their chaos. You just happened to be nearby when they needed someone to absorb it. But that stops now. Because once you see it clearly, once you understand that their version of you was never accurate, you begin to reclaim something powerful, your truth. And here's your truth: you are not too sensitive. You are not broken, you are not a burden. You are a human being with feelings, with needs, with a voice that deserves to be heard and honored. And no one has the right to twist your identity just to protect their own. So if you've been carrying shame that doesn't belong to you, it's time to set it down. You're not the problem, you're the survivor. People often think that leaving a narcissist is the finish line, that once you're out, once you've physically separated, the healing just begins to happen on its own. But that's not how it works. Leaving is only the first step. A vital one, yes, a powerful one, but it's just the doorway, not the destination. Because long after you've left, the echoes remain. You hear their voice in your head during quiet moments. You question your instincts even when there's no reason to. You wonder if maybe you overreacted. Maybe they weren't that bad. Maybe somehow you misunderstood. That's how deep their conditioning goes. It doesn't just end with goodbye. The wounds they create linger not on the surface, but deep in the wiring of how you see yourself and how you relate to the world. That's the second battle, the internal one. The rebuilding of a self that was systematically dismantled over time. And it's hard, because narcissists don't just control relationships, they colonize your identity, they rearrange your thoughts, they shape your beliefs about what love is supposed to feel like. So when you leave, there's this strange emptiness, not because you miss the person, but because for so long you existed within their version of reality. And now you're left trying to remember what your own even looked like. That's why healing isn't instant. It's not a single act of courage. It's a series of daily decisions to trust yourself again, to listen to your own voice, to sit with your pain rather than run from it. To stop blaming yourself every time you feel sad or scared or unsure. Because the truth is, what you're feeling isn't weakness, it's withdrawal. You've been living in survival mode. You've been tiptoeing around someone else's chaos for so long that peace feels foreign. And now that you're free, your nervous system is trying to relearn what safety even feels like. That takes time, that takes grace. Some days you'll feel strong and certain, other days you'll feel broken and raw. That's not failure, that's recovery, and in recovery you'll face the temptation to go back. Maybe not to the person, but to the patterns, to people who feel familiar even if they're unhealthy, to dynamics that echo the ones you just escaped. Why? Because they feel like home, not because they are home, but because pain was your normal for so long. This is where the real work begins: choosing differently. Choosing discomfort over familiarity. Choosing loneliness over manipulation. Choosing healing over validation. Because for the first time, you're building a life that isn't designed to please someone else. It's built for you, and that means reestablishing boundaries not just with other people, but with yourself. Setting limits on the self-talk that tells you you're not enough. Saying no to relationships that trigger the same cycles. Giving yourself permission to grow beyond the version of you that tolerated what you never deserved. It's not glamorous, it's not linear, it's not always inspiring. Sometimes it's just messy and quiet and slow, but it's real, it's honest, and every time you choose to show up for yourself, even in small ways, you're reclaiming a piece of your power. And maybe that's the most important part of this journey, not just escaping someone else's control, but realizing that you don't need to be rescued anymore. You are your own rescue. You are your own answer. And everything you need to rebuild is already inside you, so don't rush the healing, don't shame the setbacks, don't pretend to be okay when you're not. Just keep going, one step at a time, one breath at a time. Because freedom doesn't just mean walking away from them, it means finally coming home to yourself. Rebuilding after a narcissistic relationship isn't about fixing yourself. It's about rediscovering yourself, the version of you that existed before the manipulation, before the gaslighting, before you started questioning whether your thoughts, your feelings, your needs were even valid in the first place. Because when you're wrapped up in the world of a narcissist, your voice gets quiet, not because you don't have one, but because you're taught over and over again that it doesn't matter, that your concerns are drama, that your boundaries are attacks, that your truths are inconvenient. So what do? You adapt, you get smaller, you learn to be careful with your words. You walk the fine line between speaking up and keeping the peace. And after a while, you stop trusting your own instincts. You begin to believe the lie that your silence is strength when in reality it's survival. But now that you're out, now that you've left their orbit, there's space. Space to ask the question you weren't allowed to ask for so long. What do I think? What do I feel? What do I want? And at first, the answer might not come easily. Because when you've been silenced for long enough, using your voice again can feel terrifying. Not because you're weak, but because you're out of practice. Because every time you tried to speak in the past, it was twisted, ignored, or punished. But your voice is still there. It's buried under layers of fear, yes. But it's still yours, and now you get to learn how to use it again, not to defend yourself, not to prove yourself, but simply to be yourself. That's what healing really is. It's not just therapy or journaling or long walks alone, though those things help. It's the moment you stop waiting for permission to feel how you feel. It's the moment you stop asking if your truth is too much for the room. It's the moment you realize that you don't need to earn your right to exist. And that starts with trust. Trust in your own perception, trust in your gut, trust in your ability to make choices without second-guessing every step. Because for so long your reality was dismissed. Your feelings were labeled as overreactions. Your memory was called faulty. But now, you don't need someone else to validate your truth. You just need to stand in it. Rebuilding your voice is also about boundaries. And boundaries aren't walls, they're clarity. They're a way of saying, this is who I am, this is what I will and won't allow, this is where I end and someone else begins. And the beautiful thing about boundaries is that the more you use them, the more you reinforce the belief that you're worth protecting. You start to attract different people, People who don't punish you for being honest. People who don't feel threatened by your strength. People who don't need to diminish you to feel powerful. Because here's the truth. When you reclaim your voice, you change everything. You stop living reactively. You stop chasing approval. You stop defining yourself by how someone else sees you. And that's freedom. Freedom isn't just the absence of toxicity, it's the presence of self. It's knowing that you can sit in a room, speak your truth, and not shrink in fear. It's knowing that you can love deeply without losing yourself. It's knowing that your voice, the one they tried to silence, is the very thing that will lead you forward. You don't need to roar to be heard. You just need to stop whispering in places where you were meant to speak clearly. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be heard. You are allowed to be whole. One of the hardest lessons after leaving a narcissistic relationship is learning that love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-abandonment. Because when you've lived under the influence of someone who disregarded your limits, your no's, your comfort zones, you begin to lose sight of where you end and they begin. And without boundaries, you don't just lose control, you lose yourself. See, in the narcissist's world, boundaries are not seen as healthy. They're seen as betrayal. The moment you say, "I'm not okay with that," or "this crosses a line," it's twisted into an accusation. You're being difficult. You're too sensitive. You're not being supportive. So eventually, to keep the peace, you stop setting them all together. But what you don't realize while you're inside it is that the longer you go without boundaries, the more of yourself you give away, tiny pieces at a time. You give away your rest so they can have your attention. You give away your opinions to avoid arguments. You give away your joy, your focus, your time, just to manage their chaos. And at some point, you wake up and realize you've built a life around someone else's expectations, not your own values. That's why rebuilding your life after the narcissist isn't just about healing. It's about drawing new lines. Clear, loving, firm lines, because boundaries aren't just about keeping others out. They're about keeping yourself safe within. They're a way of saying, "This is who I am and this is what matters to me." And when you first start setting them, it's uncomfortable. Because boundaries often bring backlash, not from healthy people, but from the ones who benefited from your lack of them. When you stop saying yes automatically, some people get angry. When you stop being available all the time, some people call you selfish. But those reactions aren't reflections of your growth. They're reflections of their entitlement, and that's the shift. You start to see the difference between discomfort and disrespect. You stop feeling guilty for protecting your peace. You stop feeling the need to over-explain your decisions, because boundaries aren't apologies, they're declarations. They're you saying, "I choose me, not because I don't care about others, but because I finally care enough about myself." And you begin to notice something else too. When you set healthy boundaries, you create space for the right people to show up. People who don't guilt you for needing time. People who don't expect you to carry their emotions. People who hear your no and don't take it personally. That kind of space, that's where real connection begins, because love doesn't require you to disappear. Love doesn't demand you to compromise your truth to keep someone else comfortable. Love says, "I see you, all of you, and I still choose to respect you." And you deserve that kind of love from others and especially from yourself. So let the discomfort come, let the guilt pass, let the resistance be part of the process. Because every time you reinforce a boundary, you reinforce your worth. You tell the world and yourself, "I matter." And that truth, spoken through actions, not just words, is what starts to shift everything. You no longer feel drained after conversations. You no longer feel confused after interactions. You no longer feel like you're constantly on edge, bracing for the next emotional ambush, because your boundaries filter the noise, they quiet the chaos, they restore your center. And more than anything, they help you remember that peace is not something you need to earn. It's something you choose. Every day, with every decision, with every boundary, you don't rebuild by controlling others. You rebuild by respecting yourself. And boundaries are how you begin. There comes a moment, after the silence, after the distance, after the long nights of self-doubt, when you look in the mirror and don't just see someone recovering. You see someone becoming. And that moment, that shift, it doesn't come because everything is perfect or healed or figured out. It comes because you realize you're still standing. After all the emotional exhaustion, after all the manipulation, after all the times you thought you wouldn't make it out, here you are, not broken, not weak, but rising. And that's the final piece of this journey. Not just surviving the narcissist's world, not just escaping their grasp, not even just healing the wounds, but stepping into the life that was always meant for you. And it's not about revenge. It's not about proving anything to them. Because the most powerful response to someone who tried to reduce you is not to shrink in anger, it's to grow in purpose. Purpose is what gives your pain meaning. It's what transforms your scars from reminders of what happened to symbols of what you've overcome. But purpose isn't something you stumble upon. It's something you build, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. You build it every time you decide to live with intention. You build it every time you choose joy when bitterness would be easier. You build it every time you help someone else find their way through the darkness you've already walked through. Because when you've been through what you've been through, you gain something rare, clarity. You begin to see people differently. You start to notice who's real and who's performing. You understand the weight behind a quiet "I'm okay," or the strength it takes just to show up. And that empathy, that depth, it becomes your superpower. You become the kind of person who no longer needs loud validation. You don't need to impress anyone. You're not chasing attention. You're grounded now, rooted in experience, rooted in truth, rooted in knowing that your worth has nothing to do with how others see you and everything to do with how you show up for yourself and the world. This is where you shift from being reactive to being intentional. You start making choices not based on fear or survival, but based on alignment. You ask yourself not what will keep people happy, but what feels right for me. You stop apologizing for needing time, for needing space, for needing peace. Because now you understand that honoring your needs isn't selfish, it's essential, and you begin to dream again, not in a naive, fragile way, but with a quiet strength. You start thinking about who you want to be, what you want to build, what legacy you want to leave behind. Not because someone is watching, not because someone's validating it, but because it matters to you. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough. Purpose also allows you to let go. You stop replaying old conversations. You stop fantasizing about closure that will never come. You stop hoping they'll finally understand what they did. You no longer need that. You don't need their apology. You don't need their approval. What you need, what you've always needed, is your own permission to move forward, and you have that now, because what happened to you wasn't your fault. But what happens next, that is your responsibility. You get to write the rest of the story. You get to decide what these next chapters will look like. Will they be shaped by resentment, or will they be shaped by purpose? Let it be purpose, let it be love. Let it be freedom, let it be joy. Not the loud, showy kind of joy, but the quiet kind that sits in your chest and whispers, "I made it." You're not just healing, you're becoming, and that is your power.